It's my great pleasure to welcome you to our 18th annual presidential lecture. Our very special speaker today, Ingo Tietze, University of Iowa Foundation Distinguished Professor in the Department of Speech Pathology and Audiology and the School of Music in our College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, exemplifies how art and science are not distant cousins or even siblings, but indeed of the same body. The human voice is an instrument in all that word's meanings. It is a physical result of a physical mechanism. This mechanism serves a larger purpose, however. It is an important vehicle for human communication. But even beyond that, it is a musical instrument, an instrument that expresses works of beauty that are among the highest of human aesthetic achievements. Ingo Tietze is fascinated with all these aspects of the human voice, with its pathology and its art, and in that sense, he is a true Renaissance man. Ingo's talents are comprehensive. Not only is he a gifted scientist, but he's also a talented artist. The performance we've just enjoyed has proven that point, as well as delighted us. Ingo is at home as much in the recital hall as he is in the laboratory. He's unique, and we're honored and lucky to have him here on our faculty at the University of Iowa. We have the top graduate program in speech pathology and audiology in the country, and one of the finest schools of music anywhere. And it's no coincidence that Ingo Tietze's work is affiliated with each of these award-winning programs. The University of Iowa has a long tradition of excellence in interdisciplinarity. Academic structures tend to break up interests and activities into small compartments. Our university makes conscious efforts to bring disciplines together to explore the relationship between areas of inquiry. Those linkages produce the best scholarship, the most valuable practical applications, and the best learning opportunities for our students. I therefore point with pride to Ingo Tietze as the best our university has to offer. There's a special quality to Ingo's work, however, that distinguishes him among the best scholars. We see it in the title of his lecture, Fascinations with the Human Voice. The best scholarship and teaching come about when they're forged in the fires of fascination, the passion for discovering knowledge that compels one's persistent attention and that pushes one's talents to their limits. Ingo Tietze's fascination with the human voice reminds an ardent one, a passionate one, and we see that in his address to us this afternoon. Yet Ingo's fascination with the human voice is also a joyful one, and it is grounded in the kind, collaborative character of a man who never forgets the importance of the human connection. His work with the human voice is not merely an intellectual exercise, but is motivated by his desire to help others understand, use, and care for their voices most effectively. His co-workers will tell you that Ingo's scholarly drive is energetic and unyielding, yet is marked by a deep love for what he does and a profound care for those who help and collaboration with him. His intellect is inspiring, his temper is even, and his good humor is uplifting. Ingo Tietze's resume is long and distinguished. His biography in your program only scratches the surface of his accomplishments. I could talk all afternoon about his directorship of the National Center for Voice and Speech, his hundreds of scholarly publications, the large number of national advisory boards and scientific review groups on which he sits, and his impressive collection of awards. But the best way to know and honor Ingo Tietze is to experience his talents directly, to see for ourselves how art and science converge in him. We've already been entertained and aesthetically uplifted by him, and now it is our pleasure to learn from him. Please welcome our 18th presidential lecturer, Professor Ingo Tietze.
Thank you, President Coleman. You've greatly warmed my heart and given me courage for this lecture, because I was wondering what I would say when people like Louis Frank, who've talked about snowballs in space and the great impact that has on all of the universe, and Jeff Murray has talked about the human genome, and what could one say about the human voice that could compare to any of those kinds of topics. But I think, as you said, I think you'll find out it's the human part of this, and it's the merging of science with art, and it's the fact that we use our voice every day and we need it, that I think will make this lecture hopefully one that can be in the canonization of all those great ones that have gone before. I also want to thank Dean Sims and the selection committee for giving me this opportunity. I've entitled my talk, Fascinations with the Human Voice, because like the music of Mozart, every new examination yields a new amazement, and this happens at every level of detail. Casual listening to Mozart reduces stress. Needful listening evokes tears or tingling of the spine, and technical listening evokes sheer awe. Observing the human voice in its basic biological, social, and artistic functions brings about, to me at least, the same reaction, whether we use behavioral paradigms of investigation or hardcore mathematical modeling. Let me begin with my first fascination, and that is of the structure of the larynx. What great sounds can be made with such a seemingly lousy instrument? When acousticians design sound-producing instruments like whistles, sirens, loudspeakers, the frequency of the instrument is inversely proportional to size. Large vibrators make low sounds, and small vibrators make high sounds. There's often a sound reinforcing structure, the size of which is also commensurate with the frequencies of production. When Professor Muriello and I sang for you, we were accompanied on the pianoforte instrument. On average, it produces about the same pitch as we did, some a little higher, some a little lower. The strings that Yun Pai Shu struck on the piano were on the order of 1 meter long. Our vocal cords are on the order of 1 centimeter long. Actually, they're shown 10 times the size they really would be in comparison to the piano, but you wouldn't see them. Furthermore, the soundboard of the grand piano, which is underneath the strings, serves as a major sound reinforcing structure. It is large enough for both John and I to lie on side by side. Well, maybe not the 5-foot grand, but certainly a 9-foot concert grand we could spend the night on together. Our own sound reinforcing structure, the airway tube from the larynx to the lips, is only about 17 centimeters long, with both surface and volume measures being tiny in comparison to the piano soundboard. Even in comparison to tubes and the horns of brass and woodwind instruments, we are woefully undersized. If we uncoil the trumpet tube, its length is on the order of 1 meter, more than half the length of our body head to toe. And that's a small instrument, the trumpet generally. The result of this undersizing of our airways is that we cannot resonate many harmonics of the sounds that are produced at the source, at the larynx. We can only resonate about 1 or 2 harmonics or so at a time. By musical instrument standards, this should result in a rather dull and uninteresting instrument. Given this large size requirement for good instruments, the question is, why has Mother Nature decided to put our sound-producing organ in the neck, the smallest and most constricted region of our body? Real estate is high-priced there, with competition arising from major nerves and blood vessels, the spine and the food pipe. Why not vibrate the chest, the belly, or the back? Whoa, that went too fast. Or the buttocks, or whatever. Where surfaces are woofer size. But the problem is that these surfaces are like mush. They don't spring back. like, for example, a speaker cone or a drum head, as you see here, or a thin plate of spruce on a violin or other stringed instrument. Resonation and radiation from our body surfaces is very poor. If we close our mouth and our nose, the only sound we could make is one like that's about as good as we can do, and that radiates all of the surfaces of our body. Very poor. Then comes the next problem. To raise pitch, we must tense our vocal folds. But unlike in a piano in which tension is increased by wrapping the strings around pegs, we can only increase tension by stretching our tissues. But this stretching, or elongating, has the effect of lowering pitch, all else being equal, because longer strings have lower pitches. In the piano, the long strings are the low pitches. Thus, the two effects of lengthening and tensing are fighting each other. The next problem is that pitch and loudness are not independent in our instrument. In an easily playable musical instrument, we would like to increase loudness and keep pitch constant at times, or increase pitch and keep loudness constant. These are two knobs we want to have separate control over. But our vocal folds are more like New Year's Eve noisemakers, you know, the things that you blow into and they can uncurl, and the harder you blow, the higher the pitch goes. The same thing is the case with a duck call. This is a duck call here, and you notice, hope I don't blow anybody out here. When I try to make more sound, I get a higher pitch. There's no way to escape this. It's just the way the instrument works. And it's because of this amplitude to length ratio that I talked about this. And I've talked about more about the amplitude to length ratio in the string. If a singer wants to do a crescendo on a constant pitch, he or she has to make complicated adjustments in vocal fold tensions in several muscles in the larynx to overcome the effect of this greater blowing pressure that we have for louder sounds. The culprit in all of this is the amplitude to length ratio. In stringed instruments, this ratio is very small. A 1 meter long string would vibrate at about 1 millimeter amplitude. That would be the case in the piano, for example. In the voice, a 1 centimeter long vocal fold also vibrates at least a 1 millimeter amplitude, sometimes even more so. In scientific language, this large amplitude to length ratio creates a lot of nonlinearity in the vibrating system. And with nonlinearity, we have opened Pandora's chaos box. Chaos is always lurking in vocalization, around the corner. Rather suddenly, a clean sound can go into a dirty sound with apparent randomness in the vibration of the vocal folds. Let's go back to the duck call. All right, that didn't take a whole lot to go from the clean sound to the dirty sound. This is precisely the effect that we get in our voice. See, this is not a good musical instrument. It can get worse than that. Chaos sets us up sometimes for sudden jumping of regimes to an entirely different kind of sound. In this duck call, that's the dirty sound first, but let's go a little bit further. Now, that's good for a duck, and the ducks love this. But that's not good for a tenor on the opera stage, trying to do a high note, because this is precisely the cracking that comes oftentimes unpredicted to those who have the nerve to get up and sing on the edge on the opera stage. This is why this is such a chaotic instrument and so difficult to tame. And Luciano Pavarotti talks about taming his instruments sometimes and how long it took. I would like to now demonstrate two fine vocalists who show these extremes. One shows the pure, clean sound, and the other shows the dirty sound, but deliberately, purposefully. Now, this artist was here at the University of Iowa, was it 2 or 3 years ago, and gave a concert. You might remember.
Okay, go. Okay, go. Okay, go.
We find the same dichotomy of rough and smooth vocalization among birds. Songbirds, like cardinals, produce periodic sounds, whereas crows and blue jays produce aperiodic sounds, which appear to result from chaotic vibration, as recent research has shown. Also of interest is that birds don't have a larynx, they have a syrinx, which sits lower in the airways. Some birds have multiple folds that they can vibrate, and one tracheal bifurcation, or bronchial bifurcation, and the other in the other. So they actually have 2 sound sources, and they can make circular breathing, breathe in on one and air on the other, and then they can reverse it and do it the other way. Fantastic sorts of anatomies. Voluntary control of roughness is still poorly understood. Andrea Bocelli, a well-known pop and opera singer, has learned very well how to put dirty sounds and clean sounds in the same song and control them delicately. Early indications are that vocalists detune the natural frequencies of coupled vocal folds that are otherwise entrained. By entraining, we mean that something like a common airflow pulls them together and makes them vibrate at precisely the same frequency and the same pattern. But when they get desynchronized, then we get these modes fighting each other, and we get what appear to be noisy and chaotic sounds. My second fascination is how telling our voice is about us. Let's go back to the neck, the constricted part of our body, where the larynx shares its real estate with all major lifelines. It's a crowded superhighway there as blood, air, food, neurosignals, and respiratory fluids pass by, some racing and some creeping slowly. Air and respiratory fluids go through the larynx, the gray structure below the chin, as you see it. Blood vessels and nerves pass through and around it, and food and drink squeeze behind the larynx and between that and the spinal cord. All of these lifelines leave their footprints on the voice as they pass by. We can tell when someone is eating while they're talking, say, over the phone, which I hate. We know when they breathe hard, we know when they're nervous, we know when their throat is dry or swollen, and when they're sad, happy, or disgusted, all from the vocal signal. With instruments, we can even detect the heartbeat on the vocal signal. Neurologic disorders such as Parkinson's disease, ALS, known as Lou Gehrig's disease, or Huntington's disease, often manifest themselves in the voice before they are noticed in the rest of the body, such as in limb, gait, and other kinds of things. Voice is thus a window to body health and function. We make judgments about age, gender, emotion, personality, physical fitness, and social upbringing from a person's speech. Cyrus said, "As the man, so is his speech." Recent studies by my colleague, Dr. Stephen Gray, formerly at the University of Iowa, but now at the University of Utah, has shown that vocal traits are both familial and heritable. It is currently believed that the larynx is driven by 2 systems of neural pathways, the speech motor system and the limbic system. The limbic system, shown in red in the lower part of the elevated brain, is activated by emotions and the environment. It has a strong grip on our larynx, shown at the bottom of the figure. Sometimes called the fight or flight system, the limbic system produces motor patterns for cries, grunts, shouts, squeals, moans, and laughter in humans as well as in animals. All of this can be done in and out of the context of speech. The effect of the limbic system on the larynx is powerful. As a child, I had to go past a building that had a siren on top of it, and one day of the week, I don't know, it was Monday or Friday, the siren went off right around 3 o'clock, which was the time I came home from school. And I didn't carry a watch, so I didn't know exactly, but I always lived in fear that that thing would go off right when I'm by it, and once in a while it did. And it took over my entire body. I ran uncontrolled for about 2 blocks and screamed probably the whole time before I finally came to rest. So the limbic system took entirely control over my functions. The speech motor system, which is shown here on the top right of your slide in green, also activates the larynx together with the tongue, the lips, and other speech articulators. It could be hypothesized, and is in fact, that the speech motor system is free of emotion and unaffected by the environment, coding only speech gestures into strings of sound. In a newscast or reading instructions out loud from, say, a manual, the system is perhaps used that way, a straight line from the cortical language and speech centers to vocal output. The main task of the brain is then to coordinate the timing of all of this movement. I'd like to go to a video now and show you an X-ray of some of the motion of the articulators.
Discussion presents itself to us in a variety of forms. When a conversation is conscientiously directed toward the definition and solution of a difficulty, it immediately begins to take on the character of discussion. The discussions which occur in classrooms are rather informal in nature and are not to be thought of as public, since there is no audience present, as distinct from the participants. Nevertheless, much of the activity in classes really is informal discussion. Usually, the teacher leads the discussion, although at times he may appoint members of the class to take charge in his stead.
The reason the sound is a little poor here because these are films, X-ray films that were taken many years ago, and there were other machines running at the same time. By the way, this is a very treasured archive of productions that is still part of the University of Iowa, and hopefully will be used by more people, because at this point we no longer do these things with normal people. But that doesn't say that we shouldn't, to their credit, use the data as much as we can. I hope you saw the movement of the lips and the tongue and the velum and other structures, and how rapidly they move and how precise they're moved around by our nervous system. But how detachable is speech from the emotions? Some scientists believe that the speech motor system always engages the limbic system, making optimal use of neural wiring that already exists for primal sounds, the sounds that animals make as well. If this is true, emotions and rhythm cycles for breathing and laughter could all be used to enhance vocal communication. They become the basic building blocks for speech. Others, on the other hand, believe that the speech motor system is specially wired. Articulatory development, they would say, is part only of the human genetic code, independent of the limbic system and unique to humans. If this is true, emotions may compete with speech for use of the larynx and the lungs. When you bear emotional testimony and you, quote, choke up, your pitch sometimes rises in an uncontrolled fashion. A sob can block your respiration and your phonation, and tears, an extra mucus can cause you to misarticulate. That's poor speech, but it's extraordinary vocal communication. Another part of the nervous system that is deeply involved in vocalization is the spinal reflex system. which is in your slide down there at the brainstem. Breathing, for example, requires no conscious voluntary action because the amount of air and carbon dioxide exchanged in the lungs must be regulated. There is an inherent feedback control loop between the lungs, the larynx, and the spinal cord. Let's get a view of the larynx in action with a fiberscope. If we could go to video 2, please. We'll insert the scope here first. This is done routinely in all of the University of Iowa clinics every day. The fiberscope goes over the tongue. We're the little people in Gulliver's Travels now, going down over the tongue. And there's the larynx. It acts as a valve, opening up the space into the trachea. The white curved thing in the front is the epiglottis, and it there's a stroboscopy used here. Back to the slide. Okay. The slightest touch on the vocal folds with a foreign object will elicit a cough reflex. If we were to take a Q-tip and just barely touch the vocal fold, as you've seen it, we'd get a violent cough reflex. But here's the million-dollar question. Why don't the vocal folds go into spasm or cough every time they collide with each other, which they do hundreds of thousands of times a day? What is it about those receptors that all of a sudden says, yeah, you can go ahead and bang each other, but anytime, a piece of a cookie crumb gets down in there, we're going to cough? Well, we believe that the nervous system learns to inhibit some of the reflex system in the process of speaking. And that presents, for some people, another problem. Some voice disorders may, in fact, result from a malfunctioning inhibition of these reflexes. The reflex systems may be triggered too easily, and the speech motor system simply gets tripped up by it. This may be the case in a symptom known as spasmodic dysphonia, where a person speaks with much interruption and much tension. We get patients of this type in the University of Iowa clinics, and it's difficult to treat this illness. But there are methods, and we believe that this is one of the problems there. There is a muscle that is simply overactivated by reflexes. But we have discovered that the laryngeal reflexes also play a major role in producing vocal vibrato and trill and trilo, 3 artistic ornaments in vocal music. I think you all know what a vibrato is. It's a little undulation of pitch in the sound. Ha. If you rapidly change back and forth, ha, you approach a trill, and I can't do a trill. Some vocalists in here probably do it very well. But I see Ed Kotick here, and there's some early music that he's familiar with, and several others you hear, where the trilo is used, which is a rapid succession of onset and offset of voice, such as ha, 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 ha. and that can be cultivated to be very artistic and is used a lot in early music. The vocal tremors, I like to think of them, that come with these types of vocal utterances are like earth tremors, revealing much of what lies underneath the surface in our body. Shakespeare wrote, "His voice was properties as all the tuned spheres," recognizing perhaps that if all the neural and the aerodynamic and the acoustic systems are functioning in harmony, like pulsating oscillators, human expression with our voice can indeed be glorious. We have our brain to thank for being able to sort out all of this complexity in these neural, mechanical, and acoustic oscillators in an otherwise chaotic instrument like the duck call. Fascination 3, how well the voice and the ear match. This has been really a fascination only lately with me. We have all the audiologists in our department, but like in so many departments, you know, we do speech, they do hearing, and we don't talk enough together, and this is unfortunate. To understand voice, we must understand something about the ear, our major sound receiving organ. The key acoustic element common to both organs is a short tube, about 2 to 3 centimeters in length. It's called the laryngeal vestibule on the production side and the ear canal on the reception side. These are the impedance matching tubes that allow energy to be transferred efficiently from inside the body to free space and as a sound wave, and then back to the eardrum. The laryngeal vestibule and the ear canal both have resonance frequencies near 3,500 hertz. This establishes frequency balance, like your balance adjustments on your hi-fi at home. We refer to it as the woofer-tweeter effect, with fundamental frequency in our voice being the woofer, and the harmonics resonating in this short tube, which is what I'm doing now, being the tweeter in the voice. Let's overlay here a little bit the two frequencies and intensity regions for hearing and for voicing. What you see in the purple outline is the entire hearing region for a normal hearing individual. Plotted on the vertical axis is intensity in decibels, large range of intensities, and then frequency is plotted horizontally from 10 hertz to 100,000 hertz. We don't hear to 100,000, but we hear to about 20,000 if we have very healthy ears. Now the yellow here is the voicing region. These are all the frequencies and intensities that can be made by our voice if the listener is about 1 meter from the speaker. That's roughly a conversational type of distance. Okay, so we see we do very little in this region with our voice. Here are the sounds of roars of large animals and waterfalls and thunder, these kinds of things. Low frequencies with high intensity, we can't make them. Then there's a region down here, mid frequencies with very low intensity. We also can't make those so well. But we get very good here at high frequencies, at middle intensities. But the most fascinating thing is this region right here. Here is where the ear has its greatest sensitivity because of the ear canal. There's a special resonator here at about 3,500 hertz if you go up and down here. So that's where the ear is most sensitive. And lo and behold, our voice has the same little resonator inside the larynx, which also makes these frequencies. This is my voice here, which is not like Luciano's or others who can bring up this region even closer and approximate that so that at 1 meter they could almost hurt the listener with that particular type of frequency. All right, now let me show you something else that I find interesting, and that is the effect of soloists versus choral ensemble. If we say a soloist changes his voice in loudness from pianissimo to piano to mezzo piano, mezzo forte, forte, and fortissimo, say all of these are separate loudness levels, and let's say he doubles the sound every time in going from one to the other. That would add 3 decibels. That's just straight ordinary science. When you double power, that is 3 decibels. So 55, 58, 61, 64, and so on. So if the soloist had an 18 decibel range, which is not that difficult, my chart I showed you, I had that at several frequencies, then we could go from 55 to 70 decibels. That's 15, say add another 3. Now let's look at the choral ensemble. If we had one person doing pianissimo, by doubling the number of people, we would again double the power, and that would be 3 decibels. So 2 people singing pianissimo is like 1 person singing piano. 4 people singing pianissimo is like 1 person singing mezzo piano. 8 is like mezzo forte, 16 is like forte, and 32 is like fortissimo. So here it is that a soloist can out-sing 32 people singing soft. Now that's if you have 15 to 18 decibel range. We have measured singers, professional singers from the opera stage, Metropolitan Opera stage, who've shown us as much as 40 to 45 decibel range in some of their frequencies. If you do the same calculation, you come out with the fact that one soloist can out-sing 10,000 singers singing pianissimo. That's astounding to me. Fascination 4, how powerful the still small voice is. Let me begin this fascination with a biblical story. In the 19th chapter of 1 Kings, the prophet Elijah is discouraged with himself and his people. It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I'm not better than my fathers. As he falls asleep under a juniper tree and is finally awoken by an angel who nourishes him, he wishes to commune with God. The angel says, "Go forth and stand upon the mount before the Lord." And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great strong wind rent the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. And it was so, when Elijah heard it, that he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood in the entering of the cave. And behold, there came a voice unto him and said, "What doest thou here, Elijah?" I have often wondered, when God speaks to man vocally, is it in a booming baritone voice, a ringing tenor voice, a soothing alto voice, or a lyric soprano voice? Can't do that. Is it thunderous, piercing, or mellow? Perhaps it is some of all of these, but more often we read that it is still, calming, that is, and small. From a physical point of view, the power in our voice is puny. Vocal power is measured in milliwatts. If we were to harness the acoustic power emanating from an eloquent windbag, it is not enough to run a flashlight battery or bulb from a flashlight. But the effect of voice on people and animals is profound. In the martial arts and in sports, voice is used routinely to intimidate an opponent. Insults and vocal intimidation are now practiced as social skills, it seems. When confronted with a wild animal, our voice is probably a better tool of defense than our hands and our teeth, especially if we watch The Crocodile Hunter. You'd probably say, "You're all right, mate. You're all right." Some of you watch The Crocodile Hunter. It's my favorite show. But it is the still small voice that is really powerful. The tones of human voices can be mightier than strings or brass to move the soul, wrote the German playwright and poet Klopstock. All of this is demonstrated in our interactions with children as they grow up. Too often we move from lullabies and sweet baby talk to short, terse warnings, chastisement, and finally belittlement and degradation. It's not so much the words themselves, although they can hurt, but it's the tone of the voice. A warm, soothing voice, perhaps like the Garrison Keillor's, our prairie home companion from Lake Wobegon, that brings peace and tranquility to us. Our youth, especially teenagers, love kind, nourishing voices. Do you remember how your mother or your father called you to pick up the telephone or to come to dinner? Or do a job around the house? If only she wouldn't yell like that or mention my name like that, you thought, I would gladly have done the job. Now, your girlfriend and your boyfriend, on the other hand, they knew how to ring your bell with how they used their voice to say your name. Lord Byron said, "The devil hath not in all his quiver's choice an arrow for the heart like a sweet voice." We can sweeten our voices by changing our pitch, by pausing longer and waiting for replies, by asking a friend if there's anything harsh or any annoyance in our voice, by caressing more with words. We do it so well when we read bedtime stories to our children. Once upon a time there were 3 little bears, a big papa bear, and a middle-sized mama bear, and a wee little baby bear. This type of vocal caressing, being more expressive with pitch, loudness, and voice quality variation, is actually healthy for the voice and for the larynx particular that makes our sound. Vocal fatigue often comes from monotone speaking and loud monotone speaking. The muscles of the larynx like to be exercised in a variety of ways. If we believe anything about the so-called Mozart effect, self-generated vibrations in our bodies break down tensions and have a healing effect. Although I'm not aware of the proof, it has been claimed that those who vocalize their emotions by laughter, by sighing, weeping, moaning, are less apt to develop cancer. As I say, I don't know if that's true, but we can ask the question, perhaps, does rattling of the cells preserve them and promote healing by providing some cell exercise? We're currently testing that hypothesis. We are involved in a tissue engineering project in which we will vibrate cells, fibroblasts in particular, at various frequencies to determine how they generate, or actually how they regenerate and express themselves genetically in a vibration field. We think that we will find that a moderate amount of exposure to vibration, like a moderate exposure to sun rays, is healthy and promotes tissue growth, whereas excessive vibration, like excessive exposure to sun rays, breaks down the matrix of supporting tissue in which the cells live. Here I show you 3 histological sections through the vocal folds. What you see on the left is an infant vocal fold. Here's the airway, so this is one vocal fold, and we're cutting through this way. What we see is some skin and on the outside, and then a massive amount of soft jello-like material, which is all mucosal material. That's all the infant has to begin with. Then we look at young adult vocal fold, and we have more developed skin here. Then you have a layer of this soft gelatin-like material. Then we have a ligament here, which begins to hold the tension that we need for higher pitches. And then we have muscle tissue here. Now we look at an 82-year-old larynx, and we see less skin, we see less of the mucosal tissue, we see an abundance of ligament tissue, and it's known that with age people develop more collagen, dense collagen. In addition to that, we see strands of connective tissue coming out from the muscle, reaching into this area. Now, the tantalizing question here is this development from infant to adult to old aged simply the genetic code by itself, or does some of this happen because we vibrate this tissue? Does the environment, this special environment of having constant vibration here, set up a development of tissue that would happen nowhere else in the body? That's our question. Those of you who are or plan to be counselors, teachers, public speakers, trial lawyers, speech pathologists, or any other professional who speaks many hours a day need to learn voice preservation. The great singer Lawrence Melchior said, "Voice is as capital in the bank. You sing on the interest and not on the capital, and your voice will last." The many of you here who are teachers and those who will become teachers, remember that a strong point in class can be made with silence or a low, soft voice, sometimes more effectively than getting louder and louder and louder. Sometimes I have to speak 3 classes in a row, and I find that to get the point across, I go another 3 dB higher and another 3 dB higher and higher and higher, and the class tunes me out. If I were to just come back to 0, reset with quiet, I would do much better. Those of you who are parents, remember the same thing. If you don't want to sound like a broken record to your children, don't. Speak not when you're expected to speak, and speak soft and sweet when you're expected to be angry and loud. Use this element of surprise in your voice. The recent trend on television talk shows is for everybody to talk at once. Turn-taking is no longer in vogue. Producers probably think that it's more dynamic and natural for everybody to talk at once. But to me, it's simply an admission that nobody has anything very profound to say. Whoops, that was the last of my 5 fascinations. How easy it is to simulate vocal bravados, such as the ring in the voice and vibrato and other things, and how difficult it is to simulate ordinary speech. For many scientists, to be able to model something mathematically is tantamount to understanding it. It is for me as a physicist and engineer. Whenever you could make a model of something with equations, you've solved the problem. Mathematic simulation based on universal laws is an ultimate demonstration of cause and effect. We write hundreds of differential equations for air and tissue movement in our work and solve these equations tens of thousands of times per second to get a little bit of vocal output. Now, I'd like to lead you through a little bit of how this is done. And I have to give an acknowledgement here to Brad Story and Eric Hoffman, both of whom have spent the last 10 years doing MRI imaging and electron beam imaging to get us this data set that is so important. We begin with a scan of the head and neck region. We trim away this half of the head and that half and leave one little thing, which is this, called the airway, or the vocal tract. Above that, we have some more airway, nasal passages and cavities and so forth that also affect the sound. Now, once we've done this scan, and this is done by having a subject lie in the MRI tube for sometimes 2-3 hours, repeating the same utterance over and over again until the scanner can go all the way around and get this image. Once we have an image, then we can see all the little nooks and crannies in the airway. Here's the trachea, here's where the vocal folds live. Here's this vestibule, this little tube that I talked about, piriform sinus, and so on. I won't bother you with all the names. Here it goes into the nose and finally out to the lips. Then we can take this image and rotate it multiple ways. I like to call this either cobras or little ETs or something like that. Now, I want to show you what just this airway structure does to a sound that's very dull and that's made at the larynx. This is a representation of the airflow through our vocal folds, and it sounds simply like this. Nothing much to talk about. If we introduce this same exact sound here and let it go through the airway for an ah vowel, which is narrow in the back in the pharynx and wide here, then we get something like this.
Ah. Ah.
Now, all we need to do is widen the pharynx and narrow in the front by moving our tongue that way, and we get this.
E. E.
So that is where all the vowels, and I'll show you in a minute where the articulation is made as well. But what we need in a computer is we need to first take those airway shapes and simplify them. We make them all into cylinders. We take all of the area that these shapes have, and then we make hundreds of tiny little cylinders that we abut next to each other. And then we solve the differential equations for tissue movement of the wall, and for air movement inside, and for acoustic waves. 3 different kinds of equations need to be solved. And we do it in every one of these sections. And then we match the solutions across the boundaries at each of these black lines. And that's why it takes hundreds and hundreds of equations, and you have to solve them 44,000 times a second. That's what we sample to get 1 second of vocal output at the mouth here. The vocal folds vibrate in here by themselves by creating self-oscillation, and the acoustic waves just run back and forth here, creating this sound. Here is another view of this computer model now of the vocal tract. The lung pressure would be produced, air would begin to flow here, and the vocal folds begin to vibrate, and then we get acoustic waves bouncing back and forth, and the lips finally produce the output as a digital signal, which we can play over a digital to analog converter and actually make sound out of it. So I'm going to demonstrate to you a simple utterance first. Ya, 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 ya. This is all simulated now, and what I want you to understand is there's nothing here in the sound ever taken from the sound of a human. We don't go and make a recording and then back up. We only take the image of their vocal tract in the MRI tube, and then we produce the sound with the natural laws of physics. So here's a simulated.
Ya, 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 ya.
Now it sounds a little like somebody I know. His name is Brad Story, the guy that did the imaging. Why does it sound like him? Because he was in the tube, and from him we got these shapes. But there's none of his sound actually in this whatsoever. Okay? Now we can take his sound and transform it into a female by making the tube a little bit shorter, a little bit smaller, and it sounds like this.
Ya, 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 ya.
So voice transformation is quite exciting. We can transfer across gender and age and so forth. Now this also moves, but unfortunately on my small computer here, I can't run this at the same speed as this, so it runs 2.5 times slower. But you can see the motion first, and I will try to produce it with you so you can get the idea. Ya, 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 ya. That is basically what we're looking at. Now, let's go to a slightly more complicated sentence. I will be wandering around. Again, totally simulated from scratch with all the differential equations of motion for tissue and air.
I will be wandering around.
Okay, again, if you were to look at dynamically, think of this as going really 2.5 times faster than what you see. And again, the female.
I will be wandering around.
Don't know what female that is because that's Brad's Story, simply transformed. Okay, here's the real test. This is a sentence we've taken now. I enjoy the simple life as long as there's plenty of comfort. Now that is a tough sentence. Why is it tough? Because you got a lot of S's, you got P's, You got all the L's and so forth, R's, F. These are all sounds that are very difficult because they close, for the most part, the vocal tract. And whenever you shut down the tube, oftentimes we don't know where the energy goes. The energy gets trapped and it starts to do things that are very unpredicted. So I will show you that first by looking at a cross section. Here's the tongue, this is the mouth, here's the pharynx back here. So by now you know that. I will click on here and you'll see how near the lips and in the mouth region we get closure of the vocal tract in this sentence. Let's play the sentence first.
I enjoy the simple life, as long as there's plenty of comforts.
Now that is the original, that is human, okay, not simulated. Here is what the vocal tract does. See all of these things that are happening at the front where everything goes to zero? Differential equations don't like things going to zero, especially when they're in the denominator, which they often are in these cases. And here's what you get when you don't do this carefully. At your first attempt at simulation, you get something like this. Listen to it again. It sounds like scrap iron in a tin can. But with a little bit more work done on it and taking care of energy conservation and so forth. And once you're to that level, then you can do some things. Now we can elongate the vocal tract and make this into a bigger person. And there was no change in pitch here, by the way. This was change only in terms of the vocal tract, as we call it. And if we narrow this region a little bit, we have found that that is the nature of sort of twang sound. And if you do the opposite, if you widen back here, you get kind of a yawn effect. And for the final, we shorten the vocal tract. If we cut it off and make it a little shorter, a smaller man. Maybe it's a munchkin. Maybe it's too small here. All right. Here's what we've learned from this work over the last few years. We learn a lot about speakers. Every person has a unique sound signature. If we all say the same sentence, we all sound a little bit different. And why do we sound different? It's all tied up in a person's neutral vocal tract shape. And that is a new discovery because we didn't used to pay attention too much about the neutral tract. We thought that was uninteresting. But we find that by doing these MRI scans, everybody has a somewhat different looking airway in there. And that's what characterizes your voice from somebody else's saying exactly the same thing. In attempting to simulate highly skilled performance, we have found that humans often imitate machines. As listeners, we're captivated by machine-like precision, machine-like power, speed, extreme ranges, all of the things that athletics are made of. Thus, to my amazement, skilled performance is sometimes more stereotypic than unskilled performance. It is a little bit more like clear speech. Conversational speech, on the other hand, is full of corner-cutting strategies. We co-articulate, we under-articulate, we delete, we abbreviate. This makes speech simulation a nightmare, but singing simulation sometimes actually a little more tractable. All of the mathematical modeling that I've shown you has been used to create a singing robot, Pavarotti, with whom I've had the pleasure to perform a few times. For those who have not seen any of these performances, and for those of you who have, here's a short segment of the famous aria Nessun Dorma from Puccini's Turandot. We have the video, please. I would like to introduce to you tonight my guest performer. His name is Pavarotti.
Wake up now, Pavarotti. We have to sing. Pavarotti and I would like to sing for you the aria Nessun Dorma from Puccini's opera Turandot. I'm going to make it easy on myself. I'm going to sing the low notes. He'll sing the high notes. Take it away, maestro.
And now I have massaged your ear canal to the point where probably where you're coming to the oto clinic here. I hope that wasn't too loud, because I want to make a point right now about not too loud music and performance. Anyway, in conclusion, I would like to issue a special appeal of action to all of you. We need a health campaign to preserve the human voice. It's a fragile instrument too often abused. In restaurants, cocktail lounges, bowling alleys, bars, wherever you go, ask the proprietors to turn down competing noises. We shouldn't have to shout to carry on a conversation. Complain about excessively loud productions in entertainment centers. Loudness feeds on loudness. And if you have to speak long hours in your job, learn how to conserve your voice. To get help, visit the National Center for Voice and Speech, a consortium of 4 institutions dedicated to this cause. The University of Iowa, here being the headquarters, and University of Wisconsin, and Denver Center for the Performing Arts, and University of Utah being part of the partnership. And you can visit our website, which, thanks to Julie Ostrom, has just been revised, and we have lots of information about preserving your voice and helping others do the same. Thank you.